Welcome to the New York Business Leaders Podcast, presented by the Coyle Group. We interview the most interesting and influential business leaders in New York and hear their stories of success, challenges, and lessons learned while building their businesses and personal brands. New episodes drop weekly, so please be sure to subscribe to get updates on your favorite stream. Without further delay, here's your host of the New York Business Leaders Podcast, Gordon Coyle.
Welcome back to the New York Business Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Gordon Coyle. Today I'm speaking with Alex Embiricos, who's the co-founder of Remotion, a tech startup located in Brooklyn, who's got a pretty interesting office/remote work platform hitting the market at an opportune time. Remotion is a solution to a problem many employers and companies are facing now, and that is how to keep a team together and connected. In our evolving work world where employees function in a mostly hybrid fashion, in the office part-time and working elsewhere part-time, it's a challenge to keep everyone in sync and productive. The Remotion platform helps keep employees connected, whether they're in the office or not, in a more modern and easy fashion. During our discussion, Alex describes in more detail how Remotion works, who it's targeted for, the problems they solve, how to positively impact productivity and teamwork. We also touch on the challenges of launching a tech startup and scaling it. All interesting stuff that I hope you'll enjoy listening to or watching. You can see more at Remotion, REMOTION.com. And if you'd like to connect with Alex, his email is alexander@remotion.com. Finally, if you have an interesting story that you'd like to tell on this show, drop me a line and let's chat. My email is gbcoyle@thecoylegroup.com. Now, on to the show. Hey everyone, I'm Gordon Coyle. Welcome back to the New York Business Leaders Podcast. Today I've got Alexander Embiricos with us, who's the founder of Remotion, which is a pretty cool add-in. I want to say software, but it's kind of a tool for companies that are experiencing hybrid work environments, totally remote work environments. I'm not going to steal his thunder. So I'm going to ask Alex if he could take a few minutes, introduce himself, what his company does, how they do it, and then we'll kind of jump into the conversation. So Alex, you want to take it away?
For sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yep.
So I'm Alexander, based out of Brooklyn, New York. And funnily enough, I moved here 2 weeks before the pandemic lockdowns began. So what a time to be experiencing New York. A silver lining I like to say is that I'm experiencing New York. I'm experiencing the discovery of New York twice or thrice, kind of like the lockdown version and the like slowly, progressively less lockdown version. And actually, I love it. So cool. I'm happy to be here. I'm the co-founder of a software company called Remotion. The tool that we're building is something we call a virtual office. So like if you have a physical office where you may have some common areas where people meet to collaborate, and then maybe you have some desks or private offices where people can do their work, but other people can swing by and talk. That creates sort of a natural sense of collaboration and even team building. That is the reason you pay so much rent for your physical office. When you're remote, you don't have that. And so we build a software product that you put on your computer and gets you back that idea of like having your own private office that people can walk by and having common spaces where you can make yourself available to the rest of the team and sort of have the casual conversations about the recent Super Bowl game or someone's pets, et cetera.
And it's those casual conversations that help build community wellness within a company, large and small, whether it's in the break room, the coffee place, the water cooler, wherever that may be. And I guess that's what you're trying to replicate using this tool, correct? Exactly.
Yeah. So, we spent a lot of time talking to teams that are mostly working fully remote, increasingly now also working in a hybrid manner. And what people have found is that maybe at the beginning of the pandemic, folks thought that the productivity was going to tank. Everyone almost has seen that productivity is still very high for teams that, that don't need to meet up in person. Obviously, if you're a manufacturing company, it's difficult if you can't go to the office.
Right.
But for companies that are comprised of what we call knowledge workers, their productivity has actually increased over the pandemic. And instead, the challenge that leaders are seeing is around team formation and relationship building. And so our customers are leaders who think, ultimately we want a highly productive team and also a highly retentive team, amidst the great resignation. But they understand that in order to have that, we need to have a team that feels close-knit, that has strong relationships with each other, not only the people they work closely with, but the people who are around them as well at work. Those close relationships lead to trust, which leads to higher productivity down the line. And so most of our customers have a fairly deep portfolio of things that they do to create those relationships. So for example, they have an all hands where they bring the company together, maybe once every week or every few weeks. They have a happy hour that maybe for a while was every week and then got kind of boring. So now it's just once every month or two. They have a bunch of things that they're doing, but most of what people have figured out is how to do the scheduled programming. Like, okay, at this time of day, we're going to do this thing to spend time together and not work, but build relationships. But what's missing is that thing that happened in the office where without having to schedule it, just like almost environmentally, people would spend time together and casually talk either about work or about life. And so Remotion is basically that same kind of environment upgrade that creates the casual conversations rather than the scheduled conversations and the small group conversations.
Right. So I looked at your kind of demo reel on your website, which was pretty interesting. And for people who are maybe watching this or listening to it, you can go to remotion.com, correct? Mm-hmm. And there is a video on there, but maybe you could give us just a kind of description of where it resides on somebody's desktop and kind of walk through it without actually seeing it, because I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah. So if you think of a physical office, something that's great is you don't have to open a browser tab to talk to someone or see someone, right? You just look to the side of your computer and you glance over at them, right? And so that idea of being able to glance over at a teammate was very important to us. And I think like we at Remotion are very much in the now. We're not thinking about like many years from now, metaverse or VR or something. Like right now, how could we make it so that you could glance over at a teammate? And what we realized is that the best way to do that would be to create something that just sits at the side of your screen, a little, what we call a dock, but you could think of it as like a sidebar or a list that sits at the side of your screen and shows your teammates as small, basically profile pictures. If you're on macOS, it looks very much like the macOS dock. If you're on Windows, which we haven't built yet, but we're working on, then it will look more like the taskbar. And so the idea is you can glance over at your teammates and like see, are they free right now? Are they busy? Are they actually having a conversation? Or maybe they're hanging out in a common space, a virtual common space that I can join. And so that was actually the first version of our product. It was just your teammates. You could think of it like, hey, if you install Remotion, everyone gets a little private office that sits at the side of your screen. But then what we found was that worked well for teams that already knew each other. But as more and more teams through the pandemic who didn't know each other were forming, it's very similar to real life. If you don't know someone, you're going to be hesitant to walk over to their office just to talk, right? You're going to want to have a reason to walk over to their office. And so that's when we started building what we call rooms. And rooms are more like the micro kitchen area or maybe a co-working space in your office where as a leader or as an employee, you can go and put yourself, on that couch or sit at that table as a way of being more inviting to conversation than if you were sitting in your private office. So V2 of the product, what we have now, in addition to having your teammates on the side of the screen, we also have these little squares that we call rooms where you can see if anyone else is there, play some music that everyone shares, kind of like shared office music, and sort of spend time to casually hang out, maybe talking, maybe not.
Very cool. Who are your target audience customers? Who are the kinds of companies that are engaging with you to install this tool on their platform?
Yeah, so I think there's two ways to look at that question. The first is, what kind of people from like a product need perspective and values perspective are coming to us? And then secondly, firmographically, like what do those companies look like? So firmographically, that's the fastest thing to answer. Our bread and butter customer is going to be a leader at a company that is building something. So often like another software company that is, of size like say, 11 to 80, somewhere in that range. We have companies who are way smaller, like a lot of small, tiny startups use us, and we have teams at massive companies using us as well. But often we found that those smaller companies are companies where there is someone who's thinking about how the whole team is working together and who's willing to like quickly try new technologies. So as for, from a needs perspective, like what kind of customers come to us, this has been super interesting. I'm not sure how much everyone's, spending time on say like Twitter or whatever, Harvard Business Review even. But at the beginning of the pandemic, folks around the world were not sure how to work remotely. And so naturally, we started looking at a few companies that had been working remotely for a very long time. So in tech, at least, Zapier, GitLab, and Envision are three names that come to mind. And they espoused a highly opinionated way of working, which they called the async way of working, which means like basically have as few meetings as possible and do as much in writing as possible. And even your informal conversations, you should try to formalize those to make them as robust as possible to different time zones, and to make them as inclusive as possible as well. And I think that makes sense for a certain type of person. But before the pandemic, most companies didn't want to work remotely. And I think part of why is because they didn't necessarily want to work in that way. They wanted to be able to sort of informally, end up in a live conversation about the Super Bowl, right? Or they wanted to be able to spend a good amount of time in a meeting, like really brainstorming something without having to schedule that brainstorm in advance, or et cetera. And so the companies that come to us tend to be companies like that, where they've hired people who have a different type of culture, and in a nutshell, they just like spending time with people live. And so they're trying to figure out, the best practices don't work for us. What are some other best practices that we can have? And the reason we started Remotion is because we realized that if you wanted to spend more time live with people, but not have your day covered in meetings, that we needed better tooling for that. Hence, you basically needed an office.
Yeah. So we were speaking earlier, and my office runs on a Microsoft platform, so we have Teams, which is fine for messaging. But this is kind of, your platform is, I don't want to say Teams on steroids, but it's a different view. It's a much more live view than a sterile, type of message sort of a thing. It's you can see people on your side dock and have like live conversations with them, correct?
Yeah, and you can do that in Teams too. The big difference is when you like launch Teams, in the morning, say, like, how much do you just get a feel of you're present with your team, and how likely is it that you'll overhear two people talking about Super Bowl? So I don't know when this podcast is going to come out, but I figured the Super Bowl just happened for us in real time. So that's the topic, right? How likely is it you're going to overhear two people talking about like an ad they liked, and then jump in with your own opinion on that ad, right? Like that's just not happening in Teams today. And that's the void that we're filling. We like to think of our product as having those two purposes. First, create a sense of presence with the team. Second, create space for casual conversations.
Got it. So I want to kind of go back to those co-working rooms where you can kind of go in and wait for others in your organization to join you, correct?
That's right. Yeah. And you can obviously prompt people, and there's all sorts of tools around that.
Yeah. It's an interesting kind of thought process, because in that virtual setting, how else are you going to meet? Like you said, how are you going to meet new people who have joined the company, or entire teams that have joined the company? There's some companies that have grown rapidly during the pandemic, and everybody was hired remotely and they've worked virtually. There's been no, cocktails after work. There's been none of that kind of thing. So it's kind of an interesting perspective of how to do that. And I would imagine that this works not only in a fully remote setting, but in a hybrid setting as well.
Yeah, definitely. So 2 points there. Going back to what you mentioned about the idea of going in and waiting for someone, that's kind of one of the biggest challenges that we had to address. And we tried many things last year of how to make it not feel awkward to put yourself out there and say like, hey, if anyone wants to chat about something, anything, I'm free now to do so. A lot of people talk about the water cooler in the physical office. And that makes sense, and some folks have tried to create the water cooler remotely, and it just doesn't work. And it makes sense. It's because like actually to make a coffee, you need to step away from your computer if you're working at home. It just doesn't work. Right. And so the question we had was like, okay, well, what's the what is something that does make sense? And we tried all sorts of things. And eventually what we found that worked, not for everyone, but for quite a large number of people, is that the idea of sharing some music is something that people are used to from in the office. Like often, maybe not in your private office, but in like the lobby or something, there might be some music playing at low volume. And that created a shared experience where your company could be more than just a bunch of emails and meetings, but your company could actually express some personality. And what we found is that when, if two people are sitting in a room and there is no music playing, especially, if it's on a Zoom call or something, it can feel a bit awkward. It's like either we're going to be talking or I should leave this call, right? But that leads to your meetings feeling like very transactional and agenda driven, which is not what we want. It's not the casual conversation.
Right, right.
What we found is that if we can actually play music in the background for two people at the same time, all of a sudden it can feel like you're casually spending time together, but you don't have to be talking. It creates space for the silence, or fills the silence, if you will. And then that actually makes room for the casual conversation to come up.
Interesting.
So, this idea of like going into a room and sitting there by yourself sounds quite awkward. And that's because it is. But instead, the way we've sort of set things up is that you go into a room and you actually choose the radio station for that room, or you play your own music. And then people can come to you just based on to listen to some of the same music, and then maybe you'll have a conversation, and that is much less awkward.
That's interesting. So do you have like a human psychologist on board? Do you have people? How did you figure that out though? That's going to be interesting.
Yeah, that's like actually a great question. It should be said that we're not qualified to opine on this from like a psychology perspective. But what we can do is we can observe how people use the product. So our company is built on our top company value is start with the customer. And we've really built a lot of the way that our company works around talking to customers as much as possible. And, this week, actually, one of my focuses is like, how do we have more conversation with customers? But I'll give you an example. We as a company, we're 12 people. We've, built our product, we've launched it. We've raised actually at this point like $13 million to continue building it. And then, so some people, they know this, they find out about us through, some news thing. And then they come to our website and they're very surprised that they're filling out a survey, and, a call with me is being scheduled for them to use the product. They're like, this is weird. Sometimes I'll get angry emails. It's like, this is a waste of my time. And like, you folks should be better than this. And I hear them, I'm like, hey, like, okay, if you want, like, I can send you a link just to download the product without talking to me. But I would love it if you would talk to me, because then I could learn more about what you're trying to achieve for your team and what you've tried so far that didn't work. And so that conversation is how we started learning about this. We started realizing, people are struggling with team building, not with productivity. People have tried water cooler things. People have tried, many, many things. People have had happy hours that no one attends. And then, once they've signed up and they're in our product, we tried many different ways to make it comfortable for people to hang out, create space for casual conversation. And we can look at the stats of like, well, how much time are people spending together in the product on an aggregated, anonymized basis, right? And then, when we put music in, that worked really well. It was an experiment that we built in a week first, and then that stuck.
Very cool. Interesting how that customer had a reaction like, oh, you're wasting my time. Like consumers today, I guess, have such tunnel vision around what the experience should be. And when you change that and you say, well, I want to have a conversation with you, they reject it. We find the same thing in our business where people would rather just go back and forth by email. I think the last person they want to talk to is an insurance broker, which is what I do, my full-time occupation. But, and you kind of have to meet the customer where they are. Ultimately, you do want to have that conversation because so much is lost with emails back and forth, and you really can't get the whole gist of what somebody's business is about, what the risks are, and for you, what they're really trying to achieve, and how you may be able to customize the product to fit, what a customer is looking for. You may hear the next best idea from a prospect that you never even thought about, right?
Right, no, 100%. And I think in our case, I wonder how similar this is for you folks, but in our case, I think folks, well, first of all, everyone's very busy, and the pandemic hasn't made that easier. So, I definitely don't take it personally when someone doesn't have time to talk to me. which is most of the time. And I think secondly, there's this feeling of, well, if I hop on a call with you, you're going to try to sell me on something.
Yep.
Whereas I want to make my own decision sort of in the security of my own time without the pressure from you on a call. And so ultimately, the way that I kind of look at this is, as a business, we will have to mature past this to a point where, so basically right now we can serve people who are willing to co-design the product with us, right? And who are okay with it having a few more bugs and like some bugs being fixed slower while we're trying new things. And then at a certain point, we'll have to mature past that when we feel like we've figured out what the product should be. And that's a journey we've actually been through. We had this waitlist thing and then get on a call with the founder set up for a while. We actually took that down at some point because we felt like we had the right product early in the pandemic. And then as the market shifted, we decided to put the waitlist back up again because we realized we needed those conversations again, and like early in usage. And so we've been through this journey of kind of adjusting how much customer involvement we need based on how much learning we need.
Interesting. So you might have said it earlier. When did you launch the company?
Yeah, so this company has seen, I'd say, 3 different lives.
Okay.
So I was working as a product manager at Dropbox through, I think, until late 2017. And in 2018, myself and 2 co-founders started a gaming company together. The idea, we weren't going to build a game, but it was a lot of this sort of shared belief that is both present in Remotion and the previous company of digital technology doesn't have to make us more superficial or create more echo chambers, which we read about all in the news today. It can also bring people together for deep, meaningful conversations. But there needs to be an excuse. Just like you go to a sports bar and you look at the sports and then you can become friends with someone who has totally different beliefs from you. But sports is the thing that you share.
Got it.
Right. And so we wanted to create kind of a similar thing for using games as an excuse to bring people together.
Okay.
Started that company, completely failed after a year. And then both my co-founders left to get jobs. And I spent 6 months trying to figure out what I wanted to work on. So that was life number 1. And then life number 2, I suppose, was starting to work on some other software that's not important to this conversation with my new co-founder. And then while we were working on that, my co-founder had to move to Chicago because his partner was going to go to med school there, wanted to be supportive. And then that's when we ourselves had that internal dialogue of, well, we want to work remotely because we want to work together, but we don't want to work in this very asynchronous, formal way. We want to take the best of both worlds, which, was believed to not be possible, but we thought with better tooling could be possible. We started building Remotion and then came up with that. And that's not even life number 2, I would say. Life number 2 is we launched, to answer your question, a few months after the pandemic started. And the product then was the productivity product. It was just everyone has a private office. It's easy to knock on someone's door and talk to them. And then as the pandemic evolved and people started feeling really Zoom fatigued and not wanting to be on any more calls, we started hearing from customers that our product, not only did they not want to use it, but it was actively very bad. And they recommended that no one ever use our product because it would create more distraction at work. And so my co-founder and I had to have a hard think about that and decide, well, do we want to continue trying to grow this, knowing that we'll serve a niche audience, or should we go back to the drawing board and change what we do and why we do it to support what we're hearing customers want instead, which is support for team building. And so that's the final life, which is the one we're on now. Okay. Hopefully not the final life, but the current one, which is sort of unlaunching the product, spending a year reworking it and relaunching it gradually, which is what we're doing right now.
Got it. I was going to say that life number 2 is sort of that old necessity is the mother of invention.
Right.
You had to get there. So, and then you were kind of knocked down. And I would imagine, that's the life of a lot of tech firms in the space, that they have to kind of face these challenges and rebuild, redo, kind of. So why don't now we're on challenges, why don't we talk a little bit, what other challenges did you face in getting this product off the ground? And it's still in development. We should say it's still in beta form, only available on Mac OS, but hopefully you'll have a Windows version not too far down the road. But what other challenges have you faced and are you facing?
Yeah, so I think the biggest sort of obvious challenge for us has always been what I think of as product risk. It's, am I offering the right thing that people want? And do we even know what that should look like? In a way, it kind of reminded me of that episode you recently had about, cybersecurity insurance. And I think that because the cybersecurity market is evolving so quickly, like what product makes sense, what insurance product makes sense is possibly a moving target. Right.
Yep.
And so there's not only the risk of like, can I find my customers and sell to them, but it's like, what policy should I even offer is a question. Right. And I think that's the biggest risk for us. It's like, what product should we offer in a market that's evolving so quickly?
Yeah.
So that's the biggest risk, the biggest challenge. I think the next biggest challenge comes from is go to market. How do we, that's basically what I just mentioned. How do we find our customers, get the word out to them, and bring them into the product? The reason that's a big challenge for us is because both of myself and my co-founder are really like product builders and tinkerers at heart. So we're the type of people who, you might see in like, the canonical garage, just like writing software or building things, hoping that customers will like walk by our garage, which is unlabeled, and like ask us if we have anything that they should use, right? And so we've been slowly learning the basics of like, okay, maybe we should put up a sign on the garage that says this is actually a store. Maybe we should buy some ads. Like, actually, well, we don't use ads, but like maybe we should put the word out. Go to some ways to get the word out. And so that's been really hard for us to figure out, like, especially in a crowded space like ours, how do we get people to find out about us? And also, how do we even explain what we're building? I think in our heads we have this incredibly clear vision of how our product helps, but getting it down to just a couple sentences is really challenging. Like, what, virtual office. Okay, we had a physical office, we want a virtual office. That far, a lot of people will follow. But then it's like, how is our virtual office different from just using Zoom a lot or Microsoft Teams a lot? That's a thing that took us a while to figure out, and I think now we're slowly getting there.
Yeah, I think that clarifying your message down to a couple sentences is probably one of the most challenging things that every business owner has. I mean, we struggle with it because you say business insurance and people's eyes glaze over, and there's a million different products and a million different verticals and how you sell it and how you obtain it. And so it's I think that's something that everybody struggles with. And there's no easy answer to it, but clarity certainly is what the objective is, so that it, hits your ideal prospect square between the eyes when they don't even know what they're looking for. They say, oh, that's what I need.
Right, 100%. And I think that something we could have done better earlier is recognizing what you just said, which is that you need to identify the ideal prospects in order to create a message that will resonate for them specifically. In our case, when we were building Remotion, it was tempting to think, well, look, anyone who used to have a physical office should have a virtual office. So our market is massive. Let's just sell to anyone. Like, anyone on the internet can use our product, right? And so as a result, our messaging at the time, and even now to a large extent, is pretty vague. And I think the challenge with vague messaging is, we'll see a lot of people come through our sign-up flow and get on a call with me, and I'll ask them like, great, thank you so much for being here. Why are you here? And they'll say, I don't know why I'm here. I just loved how I felt when I went on your website. What does your product do? And it's always such a funny moment for me. I tend to message our brand person and say, hey, like, good job. Look at this customer, like, thing the customer said. And then I'll message our, marketing and design product myself. And I'll say like, hey, we're doing a bad job on this side because people don't even know what our product does. And that's still true today, by the way, which we're fixing soon.
Well, I think, when everybody has a product or a service that they can sell to a very broad marketplace, the last thing they want to do is skinny down that marketplace, because they think, oh, I'm going to lose so many prospects that I could sell to. But, I think the lesson learned for so many people is that at the end of the day, the narrower your focus is, the greater the ability to target, and the greater your ability to deliver a message that resonates with those ideal prospects who can become your customers. It's just, we feel like we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I think, too often.
Yeah, exactly. And so, it's actually something that's not obvious to me. Should new businesses, where they're not exactly sure what product they should offer yet, should they start broad and then quickly do an analysis to see what sticks on the wall, if you will? Like throw some stuff at the wall, see what sticks, and then focus your message there? Or are they better served by having that very strong hypothesis from day zero and going in? And I think I used to be in the former camp, like throw it at the wall, see what sticks, and then we can focus down. And except, self-critically, I'd say we should have done that analysis, the follow-up analysis, much sooner. Now I think I'm in the latter camp, which is I think you're still better off just having a very small hypothesis to start and then growing it from there. Curious what your thoughts on that are, actually.
I would agree that starting narrow and focusing on that ideal prospect probably makes a lot of sense, but I don't think that precludes you in the near future of throwing more stuff at the wall and seeing what may happen. We're kind of focusing on that right now with our website, that we're just not seeing the traffic we thought we were. And it may be that our messaging is way too broad, or it may be way too narrow, and it's well beyond my scope of expertise when it comes to search engine optimization and tags and keywords and all that sort of thing. But I think that drilling down to who the ideal prospect is or who the ideal customer is very helpful for us, probably for everybody, because you can get into the old marketing lingo of building personas and then how do you sell to those personas. And that may be way too complex for me as a small business owner. It may be way too complex for you guys too. But I think it's helpful, at least in the exercise, that it trains your whole team on what does an ideal prospect look like, so that you're not running down rabbit holes chasing the less than ideal prospect and end up selling your product or service to a customer that can't help you pay the bills.
Yeah, exactly. And then, that's another interesting thing that we're seeing. We have a lot of teams who use our product who we aren't actively going after, but they naturally end up finding out about us. So we have a lot of companies that are just getting started, 3, 4, 5 people who come and find Remotion and find it really useful. But the challenge with those customers is they're often new companies that may or may not survive past 6 months or 12 months. And also they're generally not willing to pay. Right. And so it was actually sort of a, interesting, it wasn't that hard of a decision, but it was a conversation we had to have of like, hey, even though a lot of customers we have are these tiny teams, we need to not build the features that they're asking for as quickly as we build the features that the larger teams are asking for, because at some point we need to pay the bills as well.
Yeah. So that gets me to the next topic. And that is that you do have a free version that you can go on your website, remotion.com, and download, I would assume, after a conversation with you. But then you have a premium version, and tell us about how you're approaching that and who your targets are for the premium version.
Yeah. So first of all, we will have a premium version, but for now, we're not charging anyone.
Oh, okay.
But the way that we're approaching this is I guess first going back to our mission. So our mission as a company is to enable everyone to work and live on their own terms, which means supporting remote work. And we want to support that across all teams. So we don't just want sort of the wealthy teams to be able to use our product. And so our plan is to have a free version that small teams can use for as long as they want. And then to have a paid version that you can start paying for if your team reaches a certain size, or if you want a certain set of premium features. And then for that, you'll pay an amount that's maybe similar to Microsoft Teams or to Slack, somewhere in that ballpark on a monthly subscription basis. And basically the idea is, let's charge in a similar way to how we're providing value, and make sure that we don't stop people from trying the product because they don't want to pay initially.
Can you give us a sense of where that size is, where the premiums would be like the ideal purchase point?
Yeah, to be honest, it's not something we've deeply thought about yet. My guess is we'd be fairly generous with the size, maybe like 10 plus. So like if by the time you're like a 10-person company, you probably have some funds. I'm actually even more excited about the idea of charging for premium features. So for example, we have a bunch of useful integrations with your calendar, with Zoom, with other video calling products. We're going to have a lot more integrations down the line to help create that sense of presence. So for example, if you use different task management software, we might integrate with that so that you can notice, like, think of like in the office, you can glance over and have an idea of like not only whether someone's free or what they're up to, but kind of like maybe some of the status of things. Like imagine if you could see like their paperwork on their desk, and that would give you an idea of like whether or not they've written your TPS report yet. So the we'll integrate with a bunch of those tools, and I can imagine that, say, beyond a certain number of integrations, that's when you pay us.
Okay.
And the reason I like that is because that'll allow us to charge based on the depth of engagement in the product, rather than on some arbitrary number of users, because teams have different shapes. And some teams, maybe there's just 5 people working very closely together who are getting a lot of value out of the product. Other teams might be sort of one central person and then many lower commitment teammates who are on a contracting basis. And it'd be a shame for that person to not use the product because they have too many teammates.
Mm-hmm. And it would seem to me that a client that gets to pay based on the level of engagement and what the value they're getting is a beautiful thing. I mean, from a customer's perspective, wouldn't we all want that, rather than saying every user is $29 a month or whatever the number is, and feel like, well, Susie doesn't really use the product that much, and I don't need to talk to that person as much. And like you said, my virtual assistant, I don't really want to spend 20, whatever the number is per month, because I only talk to her a couple of hours a day or whatever it is. It's interesting model. So we talked about challenges a minute ago. How about some success stories? I know you're a fairly young company. Have you had a story or two that kind of sticks with you that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think one that is top of mind for me, just because it was so recent and unusual in COVID, is meeting a customer at a bar, actually, where there were like a number of other people, and having them talk in real life about how they use their product and how it's helping their team. For me, it's so remarkable because I've never met most of our customers. I haven't met, when it kind of comes and it's a surprise to you, it's like this very wonderful feeling. So, actually, I haven't asked if I can mention their name, so I won't say who it is. But basically, there's a marketing agency in New York that has known about us for a while, but hadn't got across the sort of the activation energy hump of trying our product. What happened was one of their teammates was interested in creating a kind of like office hours type experience. And when they thought about that, all of a sudden it clicked, and one of the person on this team was like, "Hey, like let's try using this product called Remotion. Let's hang out in the room." And so they all got on the product. They started hanging out in co-working rooms, listening to music exactly the way we mean for our product to be used. And all of a sudden finding they're having like a lot more casual conversations than before. So that's perfect. Unfortunately, one of the teammates didn't have a Mac, so they actually bought that teammate a Mac, which I feel kind of bad about. Hopefully we'll have Windows soon. And then one of the coolest things is that the CEO of that company then sent me a screenshot of a private office that their team had made for them. And so we created this concept called rooms in our product, which I'd mentioned. But it's not explicitly a private office, but they had like set a room up to be like a private office. And the CEO is telling me about how excited they were about this. And what that was very cool for us, because it was sort of this moment where we realized like maybe we should evolve our product in the direction of everyone having like a private office just like that. Anyhow, so this is kind of how the team used the product. That was exciting, and that happens a lot virtually. But then unexpectedly, I was at the first networking event that I went to this year, and that person was there and was basically telling everyone about how they should download Remotion, and was like explaining how they use it in a way that was mostly the same as how we explain it, but with the differences around private office, et cetera. And sorry, maybe this isn't a great example, but basically it felt amazing to me. Because,
I'm sure that is a great example. It's a home run.
Yeah, exactly. But and also just like hearing it in real life is there's something different about that.
Yeah. It's I'm sure it's very rewarding and satisfying to hear somebody in real life extol the praises of what you're doing and how you're doing it and how it's benefiting that customer. There's nothing better than that. That's great.
Yeah. I would say in the more general sense, though, for me, the successes that I love to hear about are when a whole company gets on the product and they've added Remotion to their onboarding documentation of like how to get started. And it's like part of how a new teammate meets the whole team. And I love receiving messages from customers, which sometimes we'll get like when they first experience that like true casual conversation that they hadn't had. like, hey, I noticed my teammate was coworking in the library. I went in to join them and we had a great 10-minute chat in the morning and it felt great. Like, thank you for bringing this to my day.
That's fantastic.
Those are the successes I love to hear.
Yeah, that's great. So Alex, I want to be respectful of your time. We've been chatting for a while. If anybody who's watching or listening to this, I want to promote the product because it sounds so interesting. They can go on Remotion, REMOTION.com and sign up for a demo. Is that how they do it?
Exactly. So if you go there, there's a little form, and if you're on macOS, it'll take you to basically schedule a demo, and you'll get an email from me. So definitely feel free to check that out. And actually, there's one thing that I'm curious, if folks here listening to this are in New York and are reopening their offices or reconfiguring their offices to be hybrid, I would actually love to connect. My email is alexander@remotion.com. And Remotion is REMOTION.com. Because we're seeing a lot of folks in our customer base beginning to switch back to a hybrid model, and our product is continuing to work for them. But I'm just interested in learning more and like visiting more places in person to see how that's operating. So if you're in New York and opening a hybrid office, please do get in touch. Would love to just see how pick your brain on how you're thinking about it.
That's great. I'll also put your email and your contact info in the show notes and in the description box in YouTube. At the very least, this morning I hopped on their website, took a look at their video. It was very self-explanatory. It gave you the sense of how it works. I thought it was pretty interesting and exciting. We're unfortunately a Windows-based environment here, so we're looking forward to Alex coming out with a Windows version of Remotion. And I'll be sure to connect you with some folks that I know that may be helpful in New York with finding some spaces that are, coming back to work on a, hybrid basis. That would be great. And any final comments or thoughts that you'd like to put in?
No, thank you so much, Gordon, for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
It was great having you. So folks, my name is Gordon Coyle. I am the host of the New York Business Leaders Podcast. If you have an interesting story like Alex's that you'd like to tell on this podcast, please reach out to me. My email address will be in the show notes as well. And we'd love to have you on the show. Until next time, stay well. Take care.
Stay well.
That's it for this week's episode of the New York Business Leaders Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. In the meantime, find more interviews and resources at nybusinessleaders.com.